All right, Kipsters, today we're going to be looking at fractions. So if you remember, a fraction is a part of a number. So we have our numerator, which is our top number, and our denominator, which is our bottom number. Our denominator is going to be the whole, and the numerator is what is the parts of that whole, or the parts of that denominator. But our main focus today is going to be those fractions greater than 1. So what that means that these are going to be our fractions that have a larger numerator than its denominator, or are going to have a whole number and then a fraction, making it a mixed number. Let's take a look. As we think about fractions today, there's a few things that we want to remember. First, let's take a look at the chart on the right. That reminds us that the numerator names the parts being identified or counted, and the denominator is the total number of parts. It also reminds us that a unit fraction names one part of a whole, so its numerator will have a numerator of 1. Then we see on the left fractions greater than 1. This is when we have a fraction that is larger than one whole. And we can show that with an improper fraction where it has a larger numerator than its denominator, or a whole number and a fraction, which would create a mixed number. Now let's take a look at our first problem. Problem number 1 says, Malia is baking a delicious chocolate cake. The recipe she's using calls for 1 3/4 cup of milk. She only has a 1/4 cup measuring cup. How many 1/4 cups is she going to need to add in the recipe? Can you write that fraction greater than 1? Think about what this problem is asking you. If you need to, go back to that slides that help remind us of the different types of fractions and what a unit fraction is. Now let's take a look at how we would solve this problem. So we know that the recipe calls for 1 3/4 cup of milk. We know that Malia only has a 1/4 measuring cup. So we're going to have to figure out how many times she's going to have to fill that 1/4 cup to get to 1 3/4. So I know that 1 whole would be the same as 4/4. In other words, 4/4 is the same as 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. And 3/4 would be the same as 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. So now I need to figure out how many of those 1/4 I have. So as I count those up, Malia would need 7 1/4 cups. Now let's take a look at problem number 2. Julia bought 3 1/4 yards of fabric. How many 1/4 yards of fabric did Julia buy? Write your answer as a fraction greater than 1. So in this problem, we know that Julia has 3 1/4 yards of fabric. And we're trying to figure out how many 1/4 yards are in 3 1/4. So once again, I'm going to think about that unit fraction of 1/4 as I get started. So I know in 1 whole, that means that there's 4/4. But I have 3 wholes in that mixed number. So I start with 1 whole is 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. And I do that 2 more times. Then I think about that extra 1/4. And once I count all those 1/4 up, I have 13 1/4 in 3 1/4 yards, or 13 fourths. Way to work hard today, Kipsters. All of us teachers are so proud of the hard work that you're putting in while we're off school and you're at home.